Greetings and salutations, Happy Nation Sports Talk up and rolling, along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. Hope you are having a great day as we roll into another one here on the good old show. Jesse, I just realized this is your first show in what, a week and a half, 2 weeks or something like that?
Last show I did was a we in, we out with Vince on Thursday. So
That's right. That's right.
12 days ago, maybe.
Yeah, almost 2 weeks. Almost 2 weeks. First show since the big game, and it's officially been a little bit more than a week now since the offseason began, and we've got plenty of offseason stuff that we're going to cover on today's show. We're still kind of waiting, for any official word on the Chris Ash hire and, all that kind of stuff as we understand that it sounds like that's happening, much to the dismay of many Notre Dame football fans, but we haven't got any official word on that. But I mean, a ton of stuff has still happened in the last week. We had the transfer portal news with Sam Pendleton, Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, Ty Chan, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, and a couple other, walk-on type guys as well hitting the portal. Al Golden leaves, of course, for the Cincinnati Bengals. Chad Bowden leaves for USC. When you compare what's happened so far at the start of this off season, how does it compare to last year's off season, which to me got off to a little bit more turbulent start with the Chancey Stuckey news and the wide receivers like Tobias Merriweather and Rico Flores hitting the transfer portal. Chris Tyree, like it is one worse than the other? What do you think?
Yeah, I think last year's situation was definitely worse than this year's situation. I would classify, this year's situation as kind of growing pains or maybe success growing pains. The only one that I really don't, I think Chad Bowden is the only one that wouldn't fall inside of that category. But I mean, last year guys were leaving because the wide receiver room was a mess. Then they had to fire the wide receiver coach. The guys who are leaving this year, Sam Pendleton, Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, guys who saw, playing time last year, they're leaving because they feel the depth chart pressure behind them. And again, that's growing pains, in my opinion, because the roster is growing. There's an influx of kind of younger talent coming in behind these guys. And, Al Golden is basically leaving for, a better opportunity for himself, essentially. So, Sam Pendleton, Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, those are guys who all have at least their undergraduate degree. I think some of them actually might. I think I heard Rocco Spindler has his graduate degree. It's not like these guys are leaving out of spite for Notre Dame. It's just you can kind of see the writing on the wall when there's a younger, more talented guy coming in. And a lot of these guys didn't have starting spots at the beginning of the season, but made their way back in due to injury. The writing is essentially on the wall for them. And if they want to continue to play and, work towards possibly being drafted, there's just better opportunities out there for them. But you look at last season, Tobias Merriweather, Rico Flores, those guys left because the wide receiver room was a mess.
It was a lot more turbulent. Yeah, like the Chancey Stuckey stuff that was going on in the room and those receivers who ended up leaving. And, as has been the case, unfortunately, for good or bad with some of these players, like the grass has not always been greener for these guys who end up leaving Notre Dame. Have you noticed that? Like when you look at back historically, the way things have, turned out, it hasn't led to bigger and better things for the most part when these guys have left Notre Dame.
No, it hasn't. And, you could probably say that for Tobias and Rico, but the guys who are leaving
this short term for them so far. Yeah.
Yeah, the guys who are leaving this season right now, they're doing what's best for them, essentially, right? And it's not like they haven't spent time at Notre Dame. These are guys who have given and dedicated themselves to Notre Dame. These are guys who played a lot this season, obviously competed for a national championship. But again, Charles Jagasaw would have been the starting offensive lineman. Emil Wagner is going to be a starting offensive lineman. I mean, let's just be real about it. Any of the guys who felt like they weren't going to start next season but still have eligibility left, they're going to go because they got the taste of playing this season and playing at a high level. So again, why would you not go on to a school where you can continue to play and work towards your NFL, dreams? So I just it sucks to see them leave, and it might, you might have a lack of depth maybe in some spots, and obviously depth was critical this year with the injuries that they had, but it's just I'm not worried. I think when these things happen, it just shows the influx of talent that's coming in behind them essentially.
Yeah, I think this year it's I don't want to say growing pains. I don't know, like you use the term writing on the wall, and Uncle Mike Tuck's football says they see the writing on the wall as well. I mean, I think that's definitely it with the players. There was definitely more turmoil last year, in regards to some of this stuff. The most, I think, what I would call turmoil this year is more the Chad Bowden situation, because especially since he's leaving for your biggest rival. Like he's
Well,
taking a bigger paycheck, and yes, it's I'm just saying, like, and you and I were texting about it, and Vince and I talked about this yesterday. When you look at that situation, it's just like Chad Bowden was obviously going to leave at some point. It was just a matter of when. Like the fact that he was flirting with Michigan last year, and then he, again, I'm not saying this like, grudgingly or anything like that. It's just facts are the facts. He flirted with Michigan last year, got a raise, got a title, bigger position, all that stuff. And now he's leaving for a bigger check this year to go to USC. It was going to happen at some point, obviously.
yeah, I have respect for everyone that left except Chad Bowden, if we're being 100% honest about the whole situation, because of what you were again, I don't want to get like too crazy, but like I think it's pretty slimy what he did at the end of the day, because he, like you said, he flirted with, basically Notre Dame's regional rival last season in Michigan. Notre Dame responded and said, we appreciate you. We understand that you're in demand elsewhere. Here's a promotion and here's more money. And then the part that gets me this year is you have to know that when they were at USC, he had to have some sort of communications with them while Notre Dame was there.
Yeah.
And that's probably,
or at least within the last month, because obviously, there was some communication going on to lock it up that quickly as soon as the season ended.
that's what I mean. So there had to be contact with USC as you're playing them at the tail end of the season, as you're preparing for a playoff push, as you're going into a national championship. And I just think it's really slimy to leave because you wanted more money at the end of the day, right? Like, it's Notre Dame's biggest rival. And to me, I think it's going to work out at the end of the day, because if you're Notre Dame, you don't want a guy who's consistently just chasing more money. Yes, you want your recognition. I thought Notre Dame did a good job of that, of giving him his recognition and the money that he deserved. But I find it kind of slimy to start, dealing with Notre Dame's biggest rival, and then you're immediately kind of leaving as soon as the season ends. To me, it just shows that those conversations had to be happening during the season. And again, just it being Notre Dame's biggest rival, and kind of the parting comments that he had, like, I just don't know.
Well, and I think you're talking about the resources. It's not like he, was like Brian Kelly. I think it's a little bit different. He's just saying, we've got the resources. I don't think he's saying they've got better resources out there. And I mean, when you look at the state of where USC has been, they're trying to, they're from a facility standpoint. I think that Notre Dame has got better facilities than what USC has right now, if you're just going to look at that. And I mean, obviously the fact that they're willing to throw him $1 million, they know that they've fallen pretty far behind where their biggest rival is, obviously, and they've got to catch up when it comes to building that program to be able to compete in the Big Ten, because they're not built to compete in the Big Ten right now, and that's the conference they're in.
Yeah, so I said this to you. I mean, Lincoln Riley's got maybe at max 2 more years if he keeps going on this trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And if the boat sinks, the boat sinks. And I hope that Chad Bowden is happy to be on that sinking boat with Lincoln Riley, because, I mean, I get it. USC is desperate and they're bringing him in to basically do an overhaul or to turn things around. But I mean, that can go one of two ways. You can either, really excel and look like the hero, or you can go down on the sinking ship with Lincoln Riley, and now you're looking for another job in 2 years. So I hope it's worth it for him at the end of the day, because I felt like what he was building at Notre Dame was more stable and was continuing to show
and the fact that he had
growth.
a long relationship with Marcus Freeman, but
right. So now you're cutting ties and kind of going back on a guy who didn't get you the position.
He's your friend, but he gave you your start, basically. He made you a star, because you're doing this at Notre Dame. It would be one thing to pull off recruiting coups at Cincinnati, but when you're at Notre Dame and you're doing it, it gives you a completely different profile, So, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It would have been one thing if he was sort of a hired gun when he came in here, but he and Freeman had the relationship going back to Cincinnati. Freeman brings him here, and
now he's just jumping ship immediately when someone starts flirting with
going for the bigger paycheck. And, whether it's that and weather and, the family aspect. I saw Michael Hahn, there he is right again. And, it's the wife guys, I don't know. Urban Meyer's wife, obviously, was a factor, one of the factors in Urban not coming back to Notre Dame. There are a lot of different factors that go into this, but the $1 million paycheck for someone in that position, I think that it starts with that. It might not end with that, but I think it definitely starts with that. That was a huge factor in the whole thing. And, and I know Brian has said it. If Marcus Freeman felt like he was that big, that vital to what's going on here at Notre Dame, they could have matched that, but they let him walk. And I think that it was a smart move because,
why do you want a guy?
What happens when he's coming back a year from now and Alabama's making him the next offer, or whoever it happens to be, Clemson, or wherever is making him the next big offer, and you have to keep matching it. At some point, you just got to say, take the money, good luck.
It's not worth the energy to talk him off the ledge every season.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of the transfer guys, you touched on that. There's really none that I look at and say, this is a big concern that they're leaving. And like DJ is saying, Rocco was a surprise for me. And this is one, and I think maybe, some people might say that, but this is one, there were at least rumblings, I think, behind the scene that Rocco, this could be coming, during the season, the Rocco thing could be coming. Because you look at his situation, both Coogan and Spindler were down to their final years of eligibility because we're back to, the COVID year of eligibility is gone. That's not being given out anymore. And so now you're back to the old, you've got 5 years to play 4 seasons of, whatever sport in college. And so for Kugler and for Spindler, that's what they're down to. They've got their final season of eligibility now coming. And, let's be honest, if Billy Schrauth doesn't get injured during the season, Rocco Spindler, who was a starter last year, he was a reserve. He had to cut so if Schrauth doesn't get hurt, then Spindler might never have gotten to play this season. And for Coogan, same deal. Billy, Ashton Craig opened the door for his opportunity to play center, obviously, when Craig got hurt. And Coogan is, again, he's played the last 2 years, but 2021 and 2022, he only played in 1 game between those 2 years. So he's down to his, last year of eligibility. Both these guys want a chance, 1, to play, and 2, obviously they want a chance to have an opportunity to maybe play in the NFL as well. And there's no guarantees when you're down to your last year of eligibility. There was no more redshirt year for them. If they were not playing this year, that blows up their opportunity, obviously, to play right now, but it blows up their opportunity for any future to play in the NFL. So I completely understand with both of those guys. Yeah, would you like to have some depth? You're still going to have depth, but the difference is it's going to be young, very talented, but inexperienced depth behind whoever ends up starting on the offensive line next season.
If you're a Notre Dame fan, here's how I would look at it. I saw Sam Pendleton, I believe, has committed to Tennessee already.
Right.
I saw Rocco Spindler's deciding between Nebraska and Michigan, I think. I'm not sure.
Indiana apparently is part of his interest as well. Those three schools.
Not sure about where Pat Coogan has been rumored to go, but listen, if a guy can transfer from Notre Dame to the SEC, can transfer from Notre Dame to a Power Four team that made the playoff, like IU, maybe Michigan this upcoming season, that has to be a great feeling for where the offensive line room is going to be, because Notre Dame feels so confident in these guys behind them that these guys can still transfer and make an impact at some of these other big name schools. So that should tell you what kind of talent is coming up, next season between this group. So I don't know. It sucks to lose guys, but I find it reassuring that these guys aren't just going to, small schools. They're going to Tennessee, IU, Michigan. Like, that should show you how strong these guys are behind them if they can afford to lose these guys to schools like Tennessee and IU or, wherever they go.
No, exactly. They're going to have opportunities, and Notre Dame's offensive linemen are still very well thought of. And I know that there are a lot of people kind of outside look at this and see it as a problem, but like Pendleton obviously has more eligibility than these guys. But again, like Pendleton ended up being buried on the depth chart. Like, he was the number 2 center. That was at the end of the season. That was where he was. So if Craig and Coogan were both coming back, then he's sitting there at number 3, and he's probably sitting there no better than number 2 on the depth chart at one of the guard positions as well. Again, like, he had his opportunity, but I think the one thing, because seeing some comments about Joe Rudolph, and I know that Rudolph is a guy that he's not a unanimous type, like everyone's, loving Joe Rudolph, right? Like, they don't necessarily like the decisions that he's made. But I'll say one thing, because if the last 2 years have shown us nothing, you can't be comfortable just because you were a starter one year, right? Like, changes have been made. And I think that's, like Marcus Freeman has talked since day one about wanting to have competition and keeping the competition going and that kind of thing. And if nothing else, Rudolph has shown that you can't be comfortable just because you were a starter, at one point. Like, your job is still up for grabs. They have shown that. I think that's a good thing. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I do think that's a great thing. And I've always been, an advocate of this before. It's talent, not experience. You shouldn't just be playing guys because of experience. And I think clearly that's where Notre Dame, feels that they're at right now, is they're going to play talent, over experience. And I like that they're doing that across multiple positions. And I like that they're doing it at positions where you can also rotate guys in more. Like, we saw a lot of young linebackers play. We saw a lot of young defensive linemen and defensive backs play. And I know, injuries had to do with some of that, but still, I just, compared to past, it's great to see the talent getting on the field as soon as possible. There's no more, we're just holding you back because of, what grade you're in. If you're ready to go, you're ready to go. And I think that's the way it has to continue to be going forward.
I hadn't heard this, but Mike put this up, that Rudolph is a serious candidate for the Bears O-line coach. Obviously, Ben Johnson's putting together his staff over there. And there's an article that I just saw, and indeed, they've got Joe Rudolph's face up there. That is very interesting, that Joe Rudolph in the mix for that job. And of course, it was the NFL and the Chicago Bears that took Harry Hiestand away from Notre Dame originally. What's that been? 8-9 years ago? It was right after Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey were drafted in the top 10. It was that cycle after that season where they played their final season at Notre Dame that Hiestand was hired by the Chicago Bears. That didn't work out very well for him, like for Harry Hiestand, which is it's crazy to think about that, because like you think of the offensive lineman and how highly thought of Harry Hiestand is still here at Notre Dame. The way he is able to develop guys at Notre Dame and turn them into great offensive linemen, it did not work out well at all for Hiestand with the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, but a lot of that could just be, I mean, we've seen the
Philosophy and
the organizational chaos that they've had the last 10 years.
No, that is very true. That is very true. And I think that it's probably this as much as anything. Hiestand was a college coach. Like, he was meant to coach college guys more than NFL guys. And I think that a lot of guys, once you get to the NFL, are fairly set in their ways. And I think that can play into it as well. The defensive coordinator position is obviously open here at Notre Dame, and we're going to get to our top 5 here in a minute. Like, I've been thinking, like, what can we do new now that it's off season? Top 5 Tuesdays is something that we're going to be doing, and we're going to be doing a top 5 here in a minute in terms of off season priorities. But before we get to that, I was thinking about this earlier today. Notre Dame loses Al Golden to the Cincinnati Bengals. Ohio State loses Jim Knowles to a rival, Penn State, the two defensive coordinators who coached in the national championship game against each other, within days of each other, going to new jobs. Would you rather lose your defensive coordinator to an NFL job, or lose your coordinator to a rival team in your conference, basically over a salary dispute?
Yeah, I think this one is pretty easy. One is considered an upgrade, and one is pretty much a lateral move. Al Golden is, basically being respected enough to come back into the NFL after having a very successful defense with Notre Dame. Jim Knowles is literally going to one of Ohio State's rivals within the same conference for a slight pay upgrade. And, I still have bigger questions regarding that whole situation, because when you look at it,
wasn't over salary. I mean, like, all I've seen is he's going to be making about $1 million more, and Ohio State wasn't going to pay it, and that's why he walked. I mean, maybe there were some other differences with Ryan Day. You're in Ohio, Jesse. I don't know. So go ahead.
Yeah, I have to agree with DK. I don't think it was over salary. I mean, when you look at Ohio State, let's look at this past season. They have all of the resources necessary in the transfer portal. Knowles got guys out of the portal that they needed. He's coming off a national championship. He is getting paid as one of the top defensive coordinators in the game. Like, him and Al Golden were making, I think, around like $2.2 million per year. That was pretty top end for defensive salaries. So you can't tell me that Ohio State doesn't have the resources to match the offer either. So to me, something fishy has to be going on. Did Ryan Day, take all the credit for the national championship without realizing, the help that he needed from Jim Knowles? Were there other coaches on the staff that he couldn't get along with? I just think it runs deeper than he's getting maybe, $1 million to $750,000 more to go to an in-conference rival. I'm not buying it, and I still think that there is something fishy on the table. And other people are going to say, oh, well, he's from Philly, or he's from that area. Again, the guy just won a national championship and has all of the resources possible. I'm just not buying it that he left over a salary dispute.
I think that, it's part of it. Again, like, you can talk about, exactly how much he's making, and you can probably split a lot of hairs, like, he can end up with all of his incentives and all that stuff. He can end up making north of $4 million. And this is the number that I had heard as well, Ant VR, the 2.75 that he was offered at Ohio State. And, Archer says Penn State put out a video of Knowles talking about how Penn State has been his dream the entire time. Well, maybe to some extent that it was, but that's also known as propaganda. Of course he's going to say that, right, because he's got the big check and everything else right now. He's got the big salary Now, I would much rather lose my guy to the NFL than whatever rift, whether it's a rift, whether it's just money, whatever discrepancies that it happens to be. You just won the national championship with this guy as your defensive coordinator. And he was only there for the same amount of time that Al Golden was in South Bend. So I would much rather see my guy get out of college football and go to the highest level, to the NFL, than anywhere in college, let alone have it be a team that you're going to have to play at the very least in the playoffs, or every couple of years in your regular season schedule. And I meant to look. I'm going to look actually right now. I don't know if Ohio State and Penn State are playing each other next year or not. Do you off the top of your head? Yes,
No,
they
I
are.
don't.
They are. They're playing at the Shoe next year. So because obviously, Big Ten schedules are going to vary from year to year. You're not going to be playing the same schedule every year. G Baby says, I don't know why, but Jesse's starting to look a lot like Driscoll.
Could be a compliment, could not be a compliment.
Wearing the hat. I don't know. I think your jawline is starting to look a little bit more chiseled.
Thanks. Got a wedding this year,
Yeah, that's right, baby. That's right. We didn't even talk about Florida. How was that doing the Florida swim with the heated pool when it's 30 degrees outside?
It actually feels really good. It feels really good. I didn't know that we were going to have a heated pool. And so when we got there, it was like, by nighttime, it was like 30, 40 degrees, rainy. And then all of a sudden you look out the window and there's like all this steam coming off the pool. And I was like, well, it's got to be heated. And so basically it was just like a less hot version of a hot tub, but a pool. So, I mean, we got in there and honestly, the coldest part was when you got out and had to hurry back to your room in the cold weather because it was super windy as well. But the last couple of days we were there, got up to like the mid 60s and was sunny out. So I didn't get sunburnt, but I got a light, like pink kind of red, I would say first crisping of the year. But it was a ton of fun. And it was just nice to be out of gloomy, cold, snowy Ohio and to, at least slightly better sunny, palm trees down in Orlando, Florida. So I had a great time. It's always sad when you come back though and you land and you get off the plane and it's like, oh, here's the cold, gloomy snow again.
It's back. It's actually a little sunny and in the 40s here today. You were in Orlando, right?
Yeah, Orlando.
Yeah, Jason was asking where in Florida. So Jesse was in Orlando. All right. So Top 5 Tuesdays. It's we're going to start doing like a little top fives every Tuesday, whatever the category happens to be. Today it's going to be top 5 off-season priorities for the Irish. Do you have your 5 together?
I have at least the first couple done.
Okay. All right. Well, let's hear what your top priority is then. What's your top off-season priority? I think the first couple should probably be fairly obvious. What's your number one?
I would say personally, my number one priority this offseason is establishing the starting quarterback.
Okay.
I think, the offensive line will take care of itself. I think the running backs will take care of itself. I think the wide receivers will be in a good place between, what's remaining and what they've kind of added in the transfer portal. But, I just think so much of college football is predicated around your success of your starting quarterback. And I think in order to be, super successful and make a deep run, you have to have a good starting quarterback. And the reason why I'm not concerned about what Notre Dame is going to do at quarterback, I'm kind of concerned with what that style looks like because CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie aren't the same type of runner that Riley Leonard is, but they're also probably a better passer than what Riley Leonard is at the same time. So what does that do in terms of the playbook? Obviously, I think we would see less designed runs, but an ideal Mike Denbrock offense is a quarterback who's a true dual threat. And so I think you'll see more passing and better passing efficiency out of, if it's Minchie or Carr. But I still think that you're going to be lacking an aspect of the mobileness with this, whoever the next quarterback is. Because I looked at 40 times, and I mean, Riley Leonard runs about a 4.5, 4.6, and these other guys basically run like a 4.9 or a 5. Like, those aren't super fast quarterbacks, right? And so I get it. You still have a lot of talent with your running backs. So, like, what is ultimately going to be affected in terms of the run game. But I thought that Denbrock was really successful at LSU because Jaden Daniels was a good thrower of the ball, and he was a good runner of the ball. And I don't know that either or any of these guys on the roster are truly great at both, being a dual threat quarterback like Jaden Daniels was.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. Like, when you look at these guys that they've got coming in behind him as well, like the profile looks a little bit different than what you're talking about. But I'll tell you whose profile is at the bottom of the list when you talk about mobility. I know Brian has an article up about Steve Angeli at irishbreakdown.com. You might have seen it on the Champions Lounge for the subscribers, but it's up on the website as well. I mean, obviously, he's the most experienced of these guys, but he's also the least mobile of these guys. Is he going to be part of this competition this spring? Of course he is. But when you look at the other guys, certainly, as Jason says, Minchie would be the closest of that kind of fit. And really, of any of the quarterbacks on the roster, Minchie is going to be the closest to that. But the thing about CJ Carr is, while he is not necessarily a running quarterback, he has, like, he's got some wheels on him. Like, he's not a true dual threat type guy, but he's the kind of guy, like, he moves well for a guy who's considered, much more of a pocket quarterback. I'm surprised, while this is a big offseason priority, I'm surprised that you put this number one on your list, though, because there's a friend of mine who once, like the way he likes to term it is, the fire that's closest to your butt becomes the priority. And while quarterback is going to get itself sorted out, spring football is at the very least a month and a half, 2 months away at this point. So the fire that is closest to the butt is either the defensive coordinator or, the general manager / player personnel hire. So, like, quarterback is going to have to be dealt with, and we're going to have plenty of time, and the coaches are going to have plenty of time to see that this spring. But I completely agree. Like, in terms of what happens next year, that's very important. Where do you put, though, the general manager / player personnel? Because I think very easily it's probably going to be split back into two positions now that Chad Bowden is gone. Where do you put that? Where do you put the defensive coordinator in terms of your list? Are they even high on your list? Or are you just assuming they're going to get taken care of?
I would say
hold it. DK, I know DK is probably just poking it a little bit here. He did not write an article about how Angeli is going to start next year. He wrote an article about how Angeli is going to be a factor in the quarterback competition for next year. Go ahead, Jess.
So, in terms of, like, priority, I would say they're definitely on my top 5 list, but I go back and forth because if I had to, if quarterback was 1, I think number 2 would probably be, I guess it would be Chad. I'm more worried about the GM position than I am the defense position. So I would say that would be number 2.
Okay, so why are you more worried or concerned about that as opposed to the defensive coordinator position? Because you're just assuming that Marcus Freeman's going to make a good hire, whatever it happens to be, and that's going to work itself out? Because, like, to me, those are almost 1A and 1B to me, the GM and the defensive coordinator, where we are right now. Because my concern is, like, I was not concerned about Al Golden running the defense. And, like, I think we're all surprised at how things worked out in the Ohio State game. But I think that Ohio State's abundance of talent ultimately dictated the way Al Golden tried to call that game. Like I had said going into that game, that Notre Dame dictates the terms. They did not dictate the terms in that game. Ohio State's talent dictated the terms in that game. But for the most part, I had no concern because Al Golden and that defense, like he was gonna come up with answers. Not knowing who the defensive coordinator is going to be, if it's going to be Chris Ash, like I don't know that he's going to have the same kind of answers that Al Golden had. So that's why it almost pushes that one up a little bit, more to me, because we don't know who the coordinator is going to be yet.
Yeah, I don't necessarily – I'm not too concerned about the defensive coordinator because I feel like whoever it is, and whether it's Chris Ash or someone else, I feel like there's a lot of not contingencies, but I feel like there's already a lot in space or in place where the defensive coordinator isn't bringing on new linebackers, new defensive line coach, new second, like all of those things are set. And I truly believe that Al Golden, like whoever it's going to be, is just going to basically run a skeleton of what Al Golden was doing at the end of the day. I think Al Golden left the situation in a good spot. I think Marcus Freeman is also obviously a defensive-minded coach. So I guess what I'm getting at is whoever comes in, it's not like it's going to be this complete overhaul or new scheme or new philosophy or anything like that. And I still think that a co-defensive coordinator is on the table to some degree. So I think the only thing I would be concerned about is maybe like in-game adjustment type stuff, because we saw that's the thing that Al Golden was.
That's that's what Al Golden is really good at. Yeah, making adjustments over the course of the game.
And so, how much experience does Chris Ash have of true in-game experience of recent to be a guy who can show you that he can make those on-the-fly adjustments? But I still feel like they're not going to change the defense. I still think basically everyone's going to keep doing what they're doing. There's just going to be a new guy kind of at the top. Like they're still going to run a lot of the same scheme.
But I mean, when Marcus Freeman hired Al Golden, he let Golden come in with his defense. He let Al Golden run his defense. Now, did Marcus Freeman have input on the defense? Yeah, but I think that whoever he hires, he's going to let him, he doesn't want the scheme to look drastically different than what they've been running for the last 3 years. But at the same time, I think whoever he hires, he's hiring whoever he hires because of experience. And I think that he's going to let that person run his own defense. And like Joseph says, I thought Chris Ash is going to be the next DC. And we were talking about Chris Ash, a second ago. Not sure when you jumped in there, Joseph, but I mean, that is what we expect to happen, but it hasn't happened yet, so we're not going to talk about it in definitives because, look, a couple of years ago, we thought we were going to get one offensive coordinator. That's not the offensive coordinator that we ended up getting. So my point is, until something is actually announced, things can change, right? So yeah, we're still expecting that it's going to be Chris Ash, but that hasn't happened yet. So that's kind of why we still have to talk about it, in terms of if and not when.
And I also think,
how do we know this? Because that's what we have been told.
I think that Chris Ash is ultimately going to run probably a very similar defense to what Al Golden did. Just kind of doing some preliminary research. A lot of the stuff that I found was he's predominantly been a defensive back secondary coach his whole career. But he's often a guy, he likes to be aggressive. He likes to bring pressure. He likes to make offenses kind of react to his defense, right? And kind of dictate terms. That's what we just talked about. And he's very, he's very hard on the fundamentals and the discipline and bringing, blitzes from defensive backs, having kind of different pressures for, zone read looks, that sort of stuff. So I think that him and Golden's philosophy is really the same too, which again I think goes back to Marcus Freeman as being selective about, I'm going to bring in a guy who, it's not just like copy and paste or cookie cutter, but they're going to have a lot of the same similar traits. And so I don't see, a complete overhaul to the defense. There might be some tweaks here and there.
But the way they call the game, the way they, because that's, like the defensive scheme, as you very well know, can be almost exactly the same. But the way they call it, like one of the things that Al Golden obviously likes to bring pressures. Is that still going to be a predominant part of the Chris Ash defense or whoever it ends up being? And and like the timing of those pressures, like look at the Chiefs game the other night against Buffalo. Spagnuolo sat on that corner blitz all night long, never called it, waited for the right moment, and then brought, something that they had not seen the rest of the game. All those different things. That's the subtle differences, the nuances. That's going to be, it's just going to be different because you have a new person in charge of it now.
Yeah. And obviously there's going to be, like, I have more trust in Al Golden because of, his prior experience and Chris Ash has really, bounced around, you could say. I mean, after leaving Ohio State, he went on to be a head coach at Rutgers. That lasted for about 3 years. He goes to Texas, and then at Texas, that's during the COVID year. So and then after his COVID year is when Urban Meyer gets hired, and he follows, Urban Meyer, is the guy who brought him to Ohio State the first time. And so he follows Urban Meyer back into the NFL. We all know Urban Meyer had a horrible year. He gets canned. So obviously the whole staff gets canned. He stays in the NFL. He goes to the Raiders. Well, then McDaniels gets canned after like a year and a half. And then Pierce doesn't retain him on his staff. And now he's kind of stuck without a job. He goes back. I think he's like a scout analyst or something now for the Jaguars again. But, I guess I would hope that his time in the NFL, like Al Golden's, has given him time to kind of, refine or really reflect on his defensive philosophy and how it can, translate into the college game. Because I see very similar trajectories to what happened between Al Golden and himself. Guys who were good in college, got an opportunity to be a head coach, didn't really go their way. They popped back in the NFL. And while Ash's, NFL success probably wasn't as good as Al Golden's, now they're jumping back into the college world. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot in place for Chris Ash, and I personally don't see him overhauling or changing a lot of things. So that's why it's not as high on my priority list.
All right. I can live with that. Jason says that his top priority is keeping Mike Mickens, and there is the possibility of a co-defensive coordinator situation. So like rolling those two things together, how much of a priority is it to keep Mike Mickens? And what do you think of the possibility of a co-defensive coordinator situation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I think it's huge to keep someone like Mike Mickens, because look at the overhaul or the improvement of the secondary, in his time here. We're talking about, guys that Notre Dame has had corners that are getting drafted, that are making, I mean, Cam Hart's a starter in the NFL, right? You got Leonard Moore, who was not only one of the top freshman corners in the country, but he had a higher PFF grade than Travis Hunter for the entire season. So that should tell you, how good he was as a corner. And then you talk about Xavier Watts, a guy that they converted into the secondary as a wide receiver, who's a two-time All-American, and he's going to be probably a draft pick this year. You talk about Benjamin Morrison, who is going to be a first-round draft pick this year. Like, they have studs in the secondary now, and that's not by coincidence. Mickens has a large part to do with that. And so anytime you have that sort of production amongst a position group, and you probably factor in how great of a recruiter he is, then yeah, it's essential you have to keep him. and you have to also kind of feed his hungers to a degree, right? Like it's just like, you know, it's not just like Chad Bowden, but people are going to come knocking, and if they're going to offer you more money and a better position, it's no longer, I can sit back and wait, or I don't have, maybe I'm inexperienced. Like Mike Mickens has worked up his portfolio, and yeah, he hasn't been a full-time defensive coordinator position, but until you are, no one is, right?
That's
And
exactly
so
right. You're only you don't get that experience until someone gives you the opportunity, basically.
And
And
so, are they going to groom him and be these co-defensive coordinators? And eventually, the understanding is that he would take over, and Chris Ash moves along. Like, is Chris Ash here to guide and help Mickens along with Marcus Freeman potentially? I don't know, but I think you have to find a way to spin it as, this is a positive for Mike Mickens, and we're kind of setting up these resources to help you to a degree.
I think so as well. And it just feels like if this guy, as Marcus Freeman has said, is ready to be a defensive coordinator, then you've got to give him if you're not going to make him the full-blown, full-time defensive coordinator, you've got to give him an opportunity to be, part of what's going to make him a full-time defensive coordinator down the road. And because of all the things that you said, as important as he has been to this defense and to this team as a whole, with both the recruiting and the development, and like Freeman has talked about his eye and, like pounding the table for certain guys, like a Benjamin Morrison, and, like going back to Sauce Gardner at Cincinnati and Leonard Moore as well. If he is such a big part of that, it just feels like, they've given him more title the last couple of years. This is the only next remaining step to give him a co-defensive coordinator title. If you want to keep him for the long term, then it feels like you've got to make that move, right? So that he gets that experience, so that he can be in the room with Chris Ash or whoever, to learn how to be a defensive coordinator, basically, and to give his input into these things. It just, like, if you're going to keep him long term, it feels like that's what you're going to have to do.
I would agree.
So you said, and Joe Allen is saying, that the recruiting coordinator, general manager, is his top priority right now. And there's some others that we're going to talk about here in a minute. Felt like I think you said before we went down the rabbit hole of talking about the defensive coordinator, that this would be one of the next ones for you in terms of your priorities.
I think my next one would probably be it's not this. I would say, me personally, we talked a little bit earlier about where the offense is kind of be headed depending on who's going to be the quarterback. And if these quarterbacks are guys who are more so, a true quarterback, guys who are going to like dice you up with their arm, I think Notre Dame has to develop a true number one wide receiver, to be honest with you. And that's a top priority for me as well, because I think.
Do you develop that though, or does that happen just because the guy is that good? Or does it go hand in hand?
I think it's kind of full. Like, you either need to recruit or develop some sort of, like, Notre Dame needs a stud wide receiver. It can no longer be.
But watching Jaden Greathouse the last couple of games, it felt like you could feed that guy the ball and he was going to make plays, right? Like,
yeah, but where was that the whole season?
No, I get that. I'm wondering that myself, but
because these were he did it against some of the best defenses in the country, theoretically.
But again, is it because of the receiver, or is it because of, because like even Riley Leonard earlier in the season, like he kind of joked about it. Like, hey, those guys, a lot of those guys have been open. I just haven't thrown them the ball. It just feels like those were there a lot. And when push finally came to shove and you needed to make some plays, Riley Leonard started finding Jaden Greathouse, and Jaden Greathouse just started making plays. So, like, to me, it feels like you've got your number one guy on the roster. It's just a matter of building that trust and chemistry with the guy who ends up being the quarterback.
Yeah, but we have felt like that before. I need a 1,000-yard
You're
receiver
absolutely
and
right.
a 10 touchdown type of guy. Like,
I agree.
I'm not just here for a guy that maybe catches the ball, 6-7 times one game and then only has 1 to 2 catches the next game. I mean, Ohio State, everyone on the field knew where Ohio State was going with the ball, and their wide receivers were still able to dominate. Like, and again, if you're truly taking away from the dual threat quarterback and what this offense isn't going to look the same next season based on who's going to be playing quarterback compared to who was playing quarterback this season. And so if it's going to be, an actual true play action, drop back pass, they need a stud wide receiver. That's what held them back, in my opinion, this season of being a true complete team, is they needed to be complete in the passing game. And I know that has to do with Riley Leonard as well. But, I mean, the man can still throw the ball, and they still need a guy. They just need someone to consistently show up every game and get you 5 to 6 catches no matter who the opponent is.
And I feel like Greathouse can be that guy. And Fields, the guy they're bringing in from Virginia, like Michael was talking about him, how Fields and Greathouse are going to be a great 1-2 combo. And I have no doubt, but, look at what Chris Mitchell did at FIU. Last year, and we all thought how that was going to translate. Now there's a big, there is a difference between going from FIU to Notre Dame, but look at Bo Collins. While Bo Collins doesn't have Malachi Fields, didn't have Malachi Fields numbers when he was at Clemson, he was still a guy who was more than productive and who we thought we were going to get more out of this past year. That didn't happen, so it's like, I have no doubt that Malachi Fields is going to come in and he's going to be a significant part of this offense. But I'm so done trying to predict what these guys are going to do because we have whiffed so hard the last 2 or 3 years. We keep thinking that these guys are going to make these huge strides and steps, but they haven't done it. But to me, there's enough evidence, again, like just looking at the way Jaden Greathouse performed when you started looking for Greathouse, it feels like he's the guy who's ready to go, who can be a big time difference maker in the offense next year.
I just saying, like, watching the
and
national
Salty's not even here when I'm saying it.
What's gonna put them over the hump? Because, I mean, let's be real. You got Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Aeneas Williams, Jabron Payne's gonna be back from injury next season. I just feel like the run game, the offensive line, those things will take care of itself. But if they really want to be back in the national championship and win it, they need a legit wide receiver and a legit passing attack. And that's what's going to take them over the hump offensively. That's what was missing offensively. And so when you look at priorities and you look at growth and you look at, what's going to win them a national championship, I feel like wide receiver is a big question mark in terms of production. They might have the guys on the roster, and you might be confident that these guys can do it, but actually going out on the field and having over 1,000 receiving yards and having over 10 receiving touchdowns is completely different. And they need a legit wide receiver that teams are going to fear.
Devin says, why is all the blame going to the wide receivers when this season was mainly because the quarterback wouldn't throw the ball?
I disagree with that so much.
I don't, though. I don't. Like, as much as I love Riley Leonard, I don't think that he was not nearly as good at processing and making reads as I thought he was going to be. And I think that was the biggest issue with him.
I mean, obviously, I just watched a clip of him at the Senior Bowl under center, play action pass and throw a complete dart over the middle into zone coverage. Like, he's got the ability.
But he did that in the national championship game, in the semifinal as well. When like I said, when push came to shove and you had to, he did more of that. But
okay, so is that more of a trust thing between head coach and play calling of we're not going to push the boundaries or push the limits of him throwing the ball?
It could have been. It very well could have been that when you saw the kind of like when he throws those kind of interceptions that he threw against Northern Illinois, that he lost a lot of trust there. But they, like the things they talked about, two different things. One, Mike Denbrock talked before the season even started that the offense that you were going to see in week 6, 7, and 8 was going to look different than the offense that you saw in week 1. And that was the case. But they also talked about getting on the same page with play calling and things like that. And it just feels like the marriage of those two was just never completely on the same page. Didn't it feel like that to you? Like, especially as you look back now, like at some of those, I just don't feel like they were ever really completely on the same page. Like they got as far as they could get. Now you turn the page and Riley Leonard's gone, and you thank him for getting you to a national championship game. But now you've got your own guys in house, and I feel like that can be a bit different.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. Him not being able to participate in spring ball and getting late into fall camp probably had a part of that as well. Like, going through the progressions and going through, your passing reads and sort of that stuff. Like, it's obvious that his passing game was behind, other aspects of his game. And you probably get to a point when you're in season, you say, well, we don't really have the time to work out these iron out these deficiencies. Like, we need to focus on what Riley Leonard is good at and what's going to win us games, right? And so I don't know that they necessarily had the time to sit down and go through, fix some of Riley Leonard's passing, deficiencies, because you still got to win games at the end of the day. You can't lose like you did against Northern Illinois.
Exactly.
And that's what happened in that game.
Yeah.
They kind of, they wanted him obviously to make some corrections in the passing game, and it simply wasn't there. And Riley Leonard started to force some things, and they lose to a team like NIU. And so, I think Riley Leonard is perfectly capable of making a lot of the throws that he did. I just don't think he was confident in those high leverage games because it wasn't something that they really practiced or worked on a ton in the beginning of the season.
Well, and again, when you had the kind of defense that Notre Dame had, and you have the kind of running game that Notre Dame had, and the, Riley Leonard's ability to still be able to go off script and make plays with his legs and, make a short pass or two when you need him to, you didn't need to be taking any more chances than you needed to. And you didn't need to be taking any more chances than what they ultimately took, because you knew that your defense could keep you in the game 99% of the time. And the one time it didn't work, didn't work that way was unfortunately the national championship game. But again, like, you just got to tip your hat to Ohio State because there was so much freaking talent over there. It was obviously the most talented roster in the country, and they ended up winning the whole thing. Now, there are a few more comments on the quarterback stuff because we were talking about CJ Carr and Angeli and stuff like that earlier. And, like Mike is saying, really, CJ is a cut above. Sorry, just the facts. And I completely agree with that based on everything that we've been able to see from CJ so far. Jason says what sets CJ apart is his mental game, his football IQ, and his elite processing. Like, if you watched the Blue Gold game, there's just a different feel, like feel for the game and a different ability that CJ Carr has in comparison to the other quarterbacks on the roster. Do you disagree with that at all, Jess?
No, I don't disagree with that. And I think CJ Carr is I think CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey are both uber talented guys. I think they're going to fit Mike Denbrock's scheme the best. Is Angeli a good thrower of the ball? Yeah, but there's also limitations to the rest of his game. And I think when you're weighing who's going to be the starting quarterback, you got to look at composite or net of what all these guys do well, not just a singular aspect of what they do. Because, look at Angeli. Started off great, but as soon as he got pressured, he just reverted back to good old Steve Angeli of taking sacks. He fumbled the ball. He's so lucky that Jagisaw stole that ball away at the bottom of the pile. Like,
again, there's a discrepancy between who stole the ball at the bottom of the pile. It was one of the Notre Dame offensive linemen, though, because I've heard Jagisaw, Wagner, and Schrouth all credited at different points. One of them got it. I said it the other day when Vince and I were talking about it. If Abdul Carter isn't out there playing with one arm, that's where we might be having a completely different conversation about Steve Angeli and where Notre Dame's season ultimately went, right?
Yeah.
Because whichever offensive lineman was able to wrestle it away, good deal of why he was able to, credit him for getting it, obviously, but good deal of why he was able to get it away is because Abdul Carter was playing with one arm and just was not physically able, to be able to yank that ball back himself. That's the way it turned out. ND Sailor says, would Notre Dame start CJ Carr at Miami or Angeli if both are on the team?
Whoever's better.
They're going to start whoever they think is better. You're not going to start, like in this scenario, like if you think CJ Carr is the better guy, but Steve Angeli has the experience, you're not going to start Steve Angeli. You're going to start CJ Carr if you think that he's the better guy.
I mean, they literally started a true left tackle on the road against Texas A&M last season. True freshman left tackle.
Freshman. Right. That's exactly it, Michael. They're going to go with the best quarterback. And, look, we don't have to sit here right now and debate who's the best. That's what we've got the spring for. And I know that there's an Angeli camp, there's a Minchie camp, and there is a Carr camp. And I know which I'm in. And I don't know if you know which one you're in just yet, Jesse.
I'm in the Minchie or CJ Carr boat, and I want whoever can throw the ball better between the two.
Yeah. And I've said before, it's going to be one of those two guys.
Steve Angeli is just too immobile to be in a true Mike Denbrock offense.
Right. But we don't have to sit here and argue it right now. They'll battle it out this spring, and we'll find out. Are they all three still on the roster when fall training camp begins? I don't know. But as we look at some of these other offseason priorities, I had get healthy. Tom says priority number 1, get healthy. I have that on my list. I actually have it number 5 because there are so many other things. And that's kind of part of what's going on right now. Get healthy, rest, go into spring. I think that's the biggest thing. Riley Leonard was, you were talking about the Senior Bowl and the pass that he made, down there at practice today. And he did an interview afterwards where he was talking about he's still sore from the Ohio State game a week ago. And they asked him, well, why do you play? And he's like, I freaking love football. You're going to give me a chance to play football. I'm going to play football. But getting healthy is definitely a big thing, especially considering the fact that you basically played an NFL season this year.
Get healthy was also on my list, and it was near the bottom as well. Not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it's hard because this is my kind of first time post national championship, and there's obviously a lot that's happened and a lot that happened in the game. And Riley Leonard making that comment about being sore, I think it goes back to show you I'm still in the personal belief that, the guy threw up and stumbled on the sideline after that first drive. I'm still in I respect what they did, but to me, they burned themselves out on that first drive.
He says he got the wind knocked out of him at the end, and that's why.
But look at the mental mistakes that happened after. You had the formation, you had the holding, you had the snap that hits Mitchell Evans. To me, that's guys who are not only physically exhausted, but mentally exhausted after that 10-play first drive. And that's the difference in the game, in my opinion. After that touchdown and then going 3 and out and Ohio State scoring on their flip side of those drives, that's ultimately what decided the game right there. Notre Dame just had to find a way not to go 3 and out on those back-to-back drives, and that's what they did. And I think they were largely exhausted from that first drive. But again, I don't want to go too deep into that. But when I heard that comment from Riley Leonard,
I think that could have played into it when you look at the mental mistakes, especially, like Jagasaw holding wasn't a mental mistake, but 2 penalties on that drive are basically what blew it up. And I told Vince in the press box, I don't think you and I have had a chance to talk about it, but if you do anything, like if you just get a couple of first downs on one of those next 2 drives, you prevent Ohio State most likely from scoring their final touchdown
and doubling
of the
up
first half. That's right. And then ultimately doubling up. first half to second half, if you just get anything, if you just hold on to the ball for like 3 more minutes on one of those drives, or even combine 3 more minutes in those drives in the first half, it changes the ultimate complexion of how that game worked out in the long run. But they weren't able to do that.
I mean, it took everything in their power on that first drive. 4th and 1s, QB power after QB power. Then Ohio State just breezes down. Like, literally, I made a joke to one of my friends. It's like Ohio State, after Notre Dame scored, said, "Oh, all right, it's time for us to break a sweat." Like, they moved the ball down the field so much easier than what Notre Dame did, and it felt like it took everything out of Notre Dame to go on that 10-minute drive and score. And again, the biggest play that sticks out to me is Ryan Leonard couldn't even send Mitchell Evans in motion in the right cadence, and the snap hits him in the leg. Like, that's a huge mental error, you know?
Right.
So, again, that game could have played out in so many different ways. But, I mean, you mentioned it, and after watching Ohio State play those 4 playoff games, there were a buzzsaw. Who was beating that Ohio State roster? I don't think anyone. And when you look back on it, Notre Dame played them the best
big underdog
out of everyone in the playoff. They played them better than Oregon. They played them better than Texas. And granted, it took them a little bit of time to get, kind of motivated there in the second half, but they still fought back. They still made plays.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you just have to tip your hat to the better team at the end of the day, in my opinion.
Indy Sailors ask him, was that play calling on the players? Should they have called so many quarterback runs?
I say no. Drive? But
you don't think they should have called so many quarterback runs?
But that's what was working, though.
That's right. That's right. Like, he ran the ball 9 times on that. Like, he ran the ball 9 times on that opening drive. And I get why you didn't want to keep going back to it afterwards. But at the same time, it's the freaking national championship game, man. Like, I think that I keep going to him as much as I need to in that instance, And I think that he would have gladly done it afterwards. But I get why they did.
But then the thing is if you did that, why not commit to it? Why are you not going right back to that on the second drive?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think I would have kept going back to it. Jason says, yeah, empty the tank. And it's the national champ. Like, you kept the ball for 9+ minutes before Ohio State even had the ball. I would definitely have gone back to that afterwards. Because, I mean, you're basically halfway to halftime by the time you got the ball. Like, the first quarter's over by the time you got the ball back again.
Right.
So, yeah. In terms of some other priorities for the offseason, Andre says offensive line, defensive line, play calling, wide receiver development, and then the general manager, defensive coordinator. Like, offensive line is going to be a priority, and I've got that on my list as well. I actually put it number 4 on my list. The things that we've talked about, we've talked about everything on my list so far. The general manager, the player personnel director, they do need to get this done relatively quickly, but at the same time, you still want to find the right guy, because, I mean, you're in the offseason now, and the staff is out there making visits, and you can't go too far. Like, I'm sure that I know that they've got other people, I don't want to say guys, other people working in recruiting, and it's basically just like everyone pitches in and does a little bit more, but you've got to have that general manager in place, because there are so many things going on with, NIL and, all this different stuff. And you've also got to have that player personnel person there, recruiting coordinator, whatever exactly you're going to call that. That is a pretty short-term priority. Like, they need to get that shored up relatively quickly. Offensive line, again, like, that happens during spring, just like the quarterback. I think that that's all going to come together. And I don't think that they're necessarily, as we've seen the last couple of off seasons, things are not necessarily, going to be determined in the spring, but the spring will go a long way. I mean, if the reports are true about Joe Rudolph and the Bears, and that ends up happening, I mean, who knows? You might be looking for another offensive line coach here pretty soon, and that becomes a priority as close as you are to spring football. So I don't know, Jess. Any others that that you have that we haven't talked about in terms of what you think some of the priorities need to be?
No, I think my top 5 was 1 quarterback, 2 was wide receiver development or just needing a stud wide receiver. Number 3 was defensive coordinator. Number 4 was get healthy, and then number 5 was the GM position. And I'm not overly worried about the GM position, to be quite honest with you. I think there's a lot of guys out there who could do a very good job. I just think it's about finding someone who Marcus Freeman aligns with and who he gets along with, because that was the benefit of Chad Bowden. Those guys started together. He knew Chad Bowden. They obviously had a great relationship together, and they probably saw eye to eye on the overall kind of thought process in recruiting. And so I think Marcus Freeman is just going to have to find a guy who they pretty much see eye to eye. But Marcus Freeman, like if Marcus Freeman could do it, he would do it, but he just doesn't have the time or the bandwidth to do it. So he's basically an extension of himself.
But because Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden went back together and started that relationship at Cincinnati and became friends, that it's essentially you're not going to have that same kind of complete cohesiveness, trust and personality, the whole thing. You're not going to have that with whoever the next person is.
So I mean, does it make sense?
You can still find someone.
Then?
I don't know. It might be like the key is finding the person. You still have to be able to find the person who can identify the talent, like the kind of talent that you want, but also they also have to have the right personality to, like at least somewhat similarly to Marcus Freeman, who can connect with those recruits. That was a big part of what Chad Bowden did, not just identifying them, but being able to connect with them in a way that not everybody does, I think. And that's such a big part of Marcus Freeman as well. Outbound, we talked about Brady Quinn yesterday, and I said, why does the answer to every question have to be Brady Quinn? Because, look, one, we don't know, like what is, again, like the ability to identify and, communicate and all, Brady Quinn is has a great communicating skill set and all that stuff. But why is Brady Quinn going to take a pay cut to come take a position like this
for his love of Notre Dame
and work harder in the process? Because that's what he would be doing. Because he not only works for Fox TV, he also has a daily radio show. Yeah. So like, why is he would be taking a pay cut, doing what he's doing now and coming to Notre Dame and working harder in the process. So as much as like Brady Quinn would be awesome, I'm sure it's something like that. Just like it's not realistic. It's no more realistic than him getting the job at NBC, because it's just like he's got a pretty good gig doing what he's doing right now. And he does a great job of doing it both on the radio and on TV. So Alban says you did not see the other part of the comment. He just makes, okay, I didn't see it. He makes more doing what he's doing. You're absolutely right. So we completely agree on that. With all that, Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
Oh, yeah, baby. I can't believe we haven't started rapid fire yet.
I know. We've been going for a while, but we had a lot to talk about tonight. Fill in the blank. It's Blake that Drake Bowen will not play baseball for the Irish this season and will instead focus solely on playing linebacker.
It's surprising to me, to be honest with you, because coming out of, high school, he was a highly touted football and baseball guy. And I know that it was a point that he wanted to go somewhere where he could do both, right? Like that was not a deal breaker, but it was part of the deal at the end of the day. And so it's surprising to me that he's already kind of giving up on baseball. But after seeing his reaction on the field after the championship game, his post-game comments, it's not overly surprising at the end of the day, because I think he's all in and all focused on football. And I think the sour taste and the disappointment of where the season ended and them coming up short is resonating with him. And I think he wants to be a leader on this team. And if you want to be a leader and you want to be a guy who's truly committed to winning a championship, you got to make some sacrifices.
It's true.
And you got to be fully committed. Like, I've done both. And again, it's nowhere near the level of doing both at Notre Dame. But baseball is still a time commitment. And when baseball season comes, they're going to take top priority. Like, he's going to have to miss some of these things, or he would have to miss some of the stuff coming up in the spring with football. And so to me, it shows that he's fully committed to football. And I think he truly wants to be a leader and a guy that leads them to a national championship.
Completely agree with everything that you said. And like you said, like, he was one of the guys who was still out there with that glazed, dazed look on his face afterwards, sitting on the bench, watching Ohio State celebrate out there on the field. And I do think that, it's been a big motivator for him. And I agree with what Joe Allen is saying as well. He's realizing where his future is, because between the two, he's got a chance to go out and be an NFL linebacker here within a year or two. He had 3 at-bats last year for the baseball team. I think he pinch ran early in the season, and he made an early highlight, and everyone's like, Drake Bowen, great baseball player. He's tearing it up. He had 3 at-bats for the baseball team last year. And, the football team was willing to make, like they let him go over there and play baseball and practice with baseball and balance those things in the spring. And, like, when it comes to fall training camp, it's not an issue, but it just feels like, for one, he was recruited by a different, like, there was a different baseball staff in place. Before Sean Stifler, Link Jarrett was here when Drake Bowen was still in high school. And it's not like he's giving up, like, being a full-time outfielder for the Notre Dame baseball team. He got 3 at-bats last year, and I think ultimately his future is with football, and he is going to go full force and give his full attention to football. So while it stinks maybe for him that he's not able to do both anymore, I think he fully realizes where his future is, and that is as a football player, as a linebacker. Fill in the blank. ESPN has a bracket projection for next year's college football playoff field. They have number 7 Notre Dame hosting number 10, wait for it, LSU. And it would be blank if that happens.
It would be I don't even know what the word would be, but I think it would be a bittersweet homecoming for Brian Kelly, because I think that Notre Dame
would be more bitter, much more bitter than sweet.
Because I think Notre Dame as a football program is ahead of where LSU should be as a football program right now. And good luck to any team that's coming into South Bend for a playoff game and expecting to win that game. So, I think it would be, like I said, it would be bittersweet. And I think for the fans, it would be even more of like that final kind of, what's the word?
Get a little closure out of it.
Closure. That's exactly the word I was looking for. It would be closure for both sides of the party. I think it would be closure for Brian Kelly finally. And I think it'd be closure for Notre Dame fans to finally, potentially watch Brian Kelly stumble and crumble one last time where it all started.
I mean, if you thought that there was a great atmosphere for Notre Dame, Indiana last month, just think about what the atmosphere for a night game at Notre Dame Stadium would be when you've got Notre Dame, LSU, Brian Kelly coming back to Notre Dame. I am completely here for it. Like, if you would have asked me this, like this past season before, Notre Dame ever hosted a playoff game, and before Notre Dame was ever in the playoff, it would have been like, I don't know if I would want that. But where the programs are right now, and with everything that we have seen, I think I am fully ready for it, because I wasn't that thrilled about the prospect of Notre Dame in Indiana. I am full-fledged, full in on the prospects of Notre Dame LSU at Notre Dame Stadium. I think that would be awesome. I think that would be one of the best environments that maybe we have ever seen at Notre Dame Stadium if that happened. All the Fighting Irish fans at full throat, chance to boo Brian Kelly every chance they get. I'm ready for that. I'm fully ready for it. Answering Joe's question, yes, Drake Bowen was primarily a pinch runner for the baseball team last season. I guess technically still last year. So, Jess, ESPN recently did a list of the top 100 college football players from the 2024 season. 5 Notre Dame players were on the list. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you the ranking, and you see if you can guess who the players are. Now, I hope you haven't cheated. I hope you haven't looked at the list. And for anyone in the chat, if you've looked at the list, don't answer. Jesse, resist looking at the chat, maybe. So I'm going to give you the ranking. You see if you can tell me who the player is, okay?
Yeah, let's start low and work to high.
So when you say low, you're talking about like
The best.
You want to start with the best and work the other way. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. So here are the different rankings: 13, 27, 62, 68, 76. That's like a combination. Who was the number 13 player on ESPN's list of the top 100 players this season?
Benjamin Morrison.
No. Benjamin Morrison, not on the list. These were players who played, I'll just give you this hint. There were players who played a vast majority of the season. So we're not talking about like NFL draft or anything like that.
Number 13. Oh. Okay. I think I read this. I'm on the same page as you now. Number 13 would have to be Jeremiah Love.
Incorrect. He is on the list, but 13 is not Jeremiah Love. There was one player that ESPN thought was better.
Xavier Watts.
Xavier Watts. Ding, 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 ding. Number 13. That's exactly right. Xavier Watts came in the highest rated player on Notre Dame's list at number 13. So you pounded that out fairly quickly. And I'm not, like if Benjamin Morrison had been healthy, I'm fully confident that he would have been on this list as well. I will say this. There are 2 players who made this list who are a little bit surprising to me. And one player who didn't make the list who is also a little bit surprising to me. So Watts is number 13. Who is number 27 on ESPN's list?
That's got to be Jeremiah Love.
That is Jeremiah Love. Very well done. Cam Scattaboo, by the way, the running back for Arizona State. You want to guess how high they had him?
Um,
I'll give you this hint. He was in the top 10.
7th.
Number 4. Cam Scattaboo, number 4.
Just not. I'm not buying.
Wholeheartedly disagree with that. I'm sorry.
He plays in the Big 12.
Yes.
His game is predominantly about running over and running through guys. And he the thing is he always gets caught. He doesn't have breakaway speed. And I got news for you. Everyone in the NFL is physical and can tackle. So right. I don't see him just being a pinball in the NFL like he was in the Big 12. But
yeah,
I digress.
Scattaboo, nice little story, all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry. Jeremiah Love, head and shoulders better than Cam Scattaboo. They're not even
so much more talent.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so Watts is 13. Jeremiah Love is number 27. The next Notre Dame player on this list, we've got 3 players remaining. Number 62. Who do you think was ranked number 62 in ESPN's list of the top 100 college football players this season?
So I got to start kind of doing process of elimination. I don't think anyone amongst the offensive line is going to qualify. We already took care of the
Correct.
running backs.
Correct.
I don't think that a wide receiver is going to make this list because of what we
Correct.
talked about earlier in the show.
I'll give
So
you another hint. Yeah,
naturally, I'm going
go
to the
ahead.
defensive side of the ball.
Okay. Good assumption.
And I got to go with a guy who had a lot of sacks. He's projected to get drafted this season. So we already got Xavier Watts off the list. It's got to be Riley Mills.
It is Riley Mills. Very well done. Riley Mills at number 62. And I'm going to say, this is no disrespect to Riley Mills at all, but I was a little bit surprised
He's
that
getting a lot of love recently.
he was as high as he was on this list. I said that I felt like the Ohio State game would be the game that Notre Dame missed Riley Mills the most, and I think it panned out that way. So I don't know if maybe they looked at this and kind of took that into consideration. But when you look at where Notre Dame's pass rush was with Riley Mills and without Riley Mills, I think I think that maybe that went a long way. And Riley Mills comes in at number 62 on this list, and I hope that he ends up being healthy enough that he's I don't know if he'll be ready to go when training camps start next year, but hopefully he's close and he's fighting his way for a roster spot, because like the timing of it to get injured in December, that is not a good time when it, like when it comes to draft and all that kind of, he's got good film, but I hope that things work out for Riley Mills. So we have two players left for Notre Dame in ESPN's top 100, 68 and 76. Who do you think is number 68?
So I think for 68, you got to stay on the defensive side of the ball. I thought that these two guys played hand in hand together, and I think that they're kind of very similar. I think this guy, he also created sacks and is probably going to get drafted. So I could see Howard Cross being at 68 and being, because I think him and Mills are not essentially the same player, but similar production, similar, I think, going to have NFL grades. So that would be my guess, is Cross.
Unfortunately, it's not Howard Cross. I get your rationale and your reasoning, but it was not Howard Cross at number 68. It is a defensive player, though.
Leonard Moore?
Not Leonard Moore. Leonard Moore was not on this list, which is pretty surprising to me when you look at how good the secondary was and how
he was rated. I told you earlier he was rated higher than Travis Hunter in coverage. So
right.
I mean, if it's not, there's no defensive end. You told me it's on the defensive side of the ball. We got the two tackles. If it's not Moore and it's not Watts, there's really no one else in the secondary. So you got to start looking at linebackers. I think that Bowen and Osbury and Snead are more talented, but Kaiser was on the field a lot. He was still the leader of the defense, the captain. I think he's very similar. I'm drawing a blank to he's very similar to JD Bertrand. I think he's going to get drafted by someone. So I guess by process of elimination, you'd have to go with Kaiser.
It is Jack Kaiser. Very well done. Working that out. Jack Kaiser comes in at number 68 on ESPN's list of top 100 players from the season. And
I think he's literally going to follow like the same draft projection as Bertrand.
I feel like this is the most surprising to me. And again, it's not a shot at Jack Kaiser, but like you don't typically see Notre Dame guys, kind of getting this kind of appreciation on these lists. And yep, Schuler was not on the list. Jack Kaiser came in at number 68. And I think that, kind of what you're saying, I think that this potentially bodes pretty well potentially for Jack Kaiser's short-term future. Well, he's still probably going to be a later round day 3 NFL pick, but I think that he's got a chance at maybe making a roster. JD Bertrand was starting for the Falcons by the end of this season, by the way.
DK might have just said the most intelligent thing he's ever said who's to say Al Golden doesn't draft him?
Very good.
Obviously,
good
Golden's going to run the same defense.
Yep.
He obviously knows how smart Kaiser is. He knows that he can call a defense. And I feel like the Bengals need linebackers. So I would not be surprised if Al Golden – I'll put it out there now. I bet the Bengals draft at least one Notre Dame defensive player.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's, now obviously it's going to depend on where their picks come and what's available to them and all that kind of stuff. I would be completely shocked if Kaiser doesn't end up being a guy who Al Golden pushes them to try to draft on day 3. And I
mean their secondary sucks, so why not get Watts?
Yeah,
too?
Exactly. He would probably be trying to gobble up Watts. You're exactly right. And, a guy like, because they need help across that defense. And Riley Mills, if he doesn't get drafted, is he's the kind of guy that, because of the history that Al Golden has with him, you could see that, him getting picked there as well. Okay, so we have one more player on this list for Notre Dame. Number 76 is the final ranking of the Notre Dame player on this list. Who do you think that is?
I want it. So you still got to look at, overall production, where Notre Dame ended up. And even though the passing numbers weren't sexy, I feel like Riley Leonard still put together a lot of total touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over very much. And again, he was a national champion. He led an offense to a national championship. I still think his game projects well in the NFL. I think he's either going to get drafted by Buffalo, Philadelphia, or Baltimore.
I agree.
And we've talked about it before where this is a guy who only got 4 years in college, and some of his years were very limited. I mean, he had to play as a true freshman. He had injuries in other years. So he didn't even get full seasons on top of only getting 4 seasons, right? And you look in comparison to Michael Penix, Bo Nix, guys who are, 7 years in college, 8 years in college. Who's to say Riley Leonard doesn't get picked up? I think he gets drafted in like the 5th or 6th round by one of those teams I just mentioned. And they just let him sit as a backup, maybe even a practice squad quarterback for 2 or 3 years and truly see if he can develop. So, for that reason of the raw potential, being nowhere close to a ceiling and still taking a team to a national championship, I got to go Riley Leonard.
You had me at passing numbers aren't sexy. Yes, Riley Leonard is the number 76 player on ESPN's list of top 100. I mean, he ultimately was a quarterback playing in a national championship game, and I think that it took, maybe some people a little bit longer to figure out what makes Riley Leonard tick and how this whole thing works. Could the passing have looked better? Yeah, we talked about that earlier in the show, but Riley Leonard ends up being ESPN's number 76 player in their list.
I mean, at the end of it, he's still a competitor, and that goes a long way. Like, guys who want to win and will do anything to win goes a long way with being on an NFL team.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The intangible stuff was there. And I mean, Riley Leonard was just dripping with intangibles at the end of the day. I'm more than a little bit surprised, though. They have Curtis Rourke at number 25, the Indiana quarterback, on this list. Tyler Warren is number 6. Travis Hunter is their number 1. Ashton Jeanty, number 2. Cam Ward, number 3. Cam Scadaboo, number 4. And Jeremiah Smith at number 5 on their list. So
yeah, anyone who thinks Jeremiah Smith is not better than Cam Scadaboo is delusional.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so Notre Dame's 2025 schedule is complete after the ACC announced the Irish are going to visit Stanford. Finally became official. Notre Dame Stanford is going to continue. They'll close the regular season next November. Stanford's going to be one of 6 ACC teams the Irish play next fall. Are you good with that, Jess?
I'm fine with that. It's just good old Stanford. I mean, it's a Power 4 team. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, Notre Dame obviously stands on traditions and rivalries and that sort of thing. And putting it at the end of the season, they can get out to I know that the window has changed now, but it feels very much like just USC, Stanford are always going to kind of be at the end of the season. They're always going to make that last trip out to California. So, I mean, I've got nothing against it. It could be worse. It could be a MAC team. It could be a Division I AA team. It's still a Power 4 team and a school that you have a lot of tradition with. So, again, is it sexy right now to play Stanford? No, but you can't control what other programs are doing. You can just only put teams on the schedule.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, they're going to play 6 ACC teams, and that it fluctuates a little bit. The average is 5. And like Josh is saying, meh. I mean, they're going to play Miami. They're going to play North Carolina.
Would you rather them play NIU again and potentially be embarrassed?
Yeah, there's not going to be any MAC teams on the schedule. The only group of 5 is going to be Navy. The ACC teams are going to be Miami, North Carolina State, Boston College, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, and Stanford. It's like you've got Texas A&M on the schedule. Obviously, Miami is expected to be pretty good. I think that it's a pretty solid schedule, all things considered. And the way the schedule lays out, you've got Miami, you're at Miami week 1. Then you've got a bye in week 2, and then you host Texas A&M. Then it goes Purdue at Arkansas, Boise State, NC State, USC, and then you've got your second bye October 25th. It's going to be pretty standard now where you're going to have 2 bye weeks during the season. And then after the second bye, at BC, Navy, at Pitt, Syracuse, at Stanford. That's pretty manageable at the end. What do you think about how the schedule ends up laying out?
Yeah, I think that the way that the schedule lays out is your toughest portion of the schedule is the first month of the season. You've got Miami, Texas A&M, and Arkansas all in there. I would say it would be pretty tough had they not put the bye in between Miami and Texas A&M. I think that's very crucial when you look at it, because I think having to play at Miami and then at home then the next week potentially against Texas A&M. I mean, I think Texas A&M is going to be better than last year, and luckily they get to play them at home. At Miami, I don't know what the turnover is going to look like with Ward leaving, and I'm not truly sold on Carson Beck being, a top, but it's still a good program on the road against a good quarterback potentially. So, you don't know what Arkansas is going to be. They still are in the SEC. They're still going to have great recruits, and you're playing at Arkansas. So I think that also plays a factor. If it were Boise State this season, I would say that first 5 weeks is probably tougher than anyone's in the country, to be honest with you. But I mean, they're lucky that Boise State's going to fall off. I don't know.
I mean, Boise State's still going to be solid, but they won't be nearly as good as this year because you're not going to have, a potential top 10 pick, Ashton Genty, on the roster anymore.
So I'm more worried, I guess, to sum it up with how it lays out. I think the first half of the schedule is more crucial than the second half of the schedule.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's thrilled with having the bye week right away, but the fact of the matter is there's only because these schedules are drawn up so much in advance, there's not a whole lot you can do, and you're going to have 2 byes, is it better than having 2 byes late in the season, which is what they had? I think if you could do this, you would draw it up like you play 4 games, you have a bye, you play 4 more games, you have a bye, but it's not going to be a perfect situation. So no, but you're absolutely right. Like the schedule is front loaded. You get past the front end of that schedule and you're feeling pretty good about the way things shake out. You get through that second bye. There's only so much you can do. So I'm curious, do you feel any differently about Ryan Day after he won his first national championship?
No, I would have felt more about him if he lost because, we've talked about it. Let's be real about it as well. That was the best roster in college football. You talk at the beginning of the season, who told you should have won the national championship? Ohio State. I would say the only thing is that Ryan Day actually coached through expectations for once, I believe. And yes, he lost to Michigan, and Michigan fans make that a much bigger deal than what it needs to be. The man is a national championship. Who cares about Michigan? Who cares about the rivalry? Who cares about a Big Ten championship? You won the ultimate goal. You won a national championship. Everything is a wash after that. But I mean, let's be 100% real about what their offense was. NFL quarterback, 2 NFL wide receivers, running backs, 3 NFL wide receivers, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Emeka Mbuka,
yeah,
all going to be drafted. Will Howard going to be drafted. Judkins going to be drafted. Travion Henderson going to be drafted. There's a couple of those offensive linemen who are going to be drafted. You go to the defensive side of the ball, you got one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. You got great defensive ends who are going to get drafted.
I mean, all these things you're saying are fair, and they did, obviously have to shell out a lot of money to get them to come back. You're absolutely right. But I mean, what's different from any other year, basically, because they obviously recruit at a high level year in and year out. They always have one of the more talented receiver. Yeah, they always have one of the more talented rosters in the country. So, like, I think you can make it, there's obviously a case that maybe he should have won one before this. So I don't feel any differently about him. He's finally got it. He's still one of the least likable coaches in the country. Like if you made the least likable Mount Rushmore of current coaches, it's like him, James Franklin, Brian Kelly. I don't know who else is on it right now.
The thing about Ryan Day is the man wins a national championship and then immediately starts crying about tampering. It's like, dude, you're
right.
You completed your roster by going to the portal last season. Caleb Downs literally said he did not want to leave Alabama, but he did. So it's like, what did you do to pull him out of the hands of Alabama, right? So it's like, I don't know. I have a lot of Ohio State fans, unfortunately, because of where I live. And I didn't realize this, but this roster was a lot of homegrown guys and guys who were, older. Right? A lot of seniors were on this team.
Yeah.
It felt like the perfect marriage of their homegrown guys and then completing the puzzle with the guys they got out of the portal between Judkins, Will Howard, Caleb Downs. Like, it was the perfect compilation. And so I guess I'm impressed that he actually did it and didn't fall on his face in the playoff. But at the same time, all the cards were stacked up in his favor. Like, this was a team that was built to win a national championship.
It's exactly right. I would have felt more different. I think you said it. I would have felt more differently about him if they hadn't won. Like, you would still be thinking, like, what this guy has all this talent.
I think he should have been fired if he lost, but that's just me.
Really? You think it would have been fireable if they had lost in the national championship game?
He was 0 for 3. He would have lost to Michigan, lost the Big Ten championship, and lost in the national championship.
Well, they didn't get to the Big Ten championship game, though.
Right. So they failed to win a Big Ten championship. They failed to beat Michigan, and they failed to win a national championship. Those are the 3 goals of the Ohio State coach, and he did it with what was supposed to be the best roster that he's ever had and the best roster in all of college football. So, yeah, I would have felt like he should have. It would have been a long conversation.
Yeah. And I don't disagree with that. Like Tom says, the fact that Ryan Day lost 2 games with his roster. I mean, they did come back and at least beat one of the teams that beat them. It's still like the fact that roster lost to the roster that Sharon Moore has at Michigan. Like that is just a colossal fail. And like anything but winning a national championship, I agree, probably would have been pretty unacceptable if you're sitting on the
You're
Ohio
paying
State
a defensive coordinator the top salary in college football. Like, everything was there for Ryan Day. All he had to do was not mess it up, and he got very close. Because people have said it before, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but in the old playoff, Ohio State doesn't even make the playoff,
right?
Let alone win a national championship.
Give me one early Super Bowl prop bet that you like the most?
The prop bet that I like the most is Travis Kelce over on receptions.
And what's the number?
I don't know the number. Whatever it is, I'm taking the over.
You're just going to take it over, even though they only threw to him Patrick Mahomes only threw to him twice.
Correct.
Against Buffalo.
I think the Eagles defense is vulnerable to tight ends.
I like
Zach
that.
Ertz had 11 catches in the last game. I think when Patrick Mahomes is playing in his biggest games, he knows who his guy is. He knows who the security blanket is, the guy who he trusts. And I think naturally, Travis Kelce just finds a way to get open, especially in zone coverage.
With the exception of against Buffalo. Buffalo did a good job of taking him away. I thought that late in the game, Mahomes was going to have to start finding him a little bit more because it was still close and they had to go down and score. That didn't necessarily happen that way, but I'll have to see what the over is for Travis Kelce. You're saying no matter what it is, you would pound the over on Kelce, though.
What's yours?
Mine is actually, it's an over-under as well. Mine is Patrick Mahomes' rushing attempt over-under is 6.5. And you get plus 105 odds on that. He's only gone over on this twice this season, but both have been in their 2 playoff games. So I love the over on Patrick Mahomes' 6.5 rushing attempts in the Super Bowl.
I think what also makes that a good bet is Mahomes gets out on the perimeter, and Jalen Carter sucks up everything in the middle. So I think you're going to have to try to get out on the edges. And, I mean, Kansas City ran that play-action boot to Mahomes like every 3rd and 4th and 1 that they needed him. So
yep,
I see that being there too.
You're just going to keep it in his hands as much as possible and give him the option, let him make plays with his legs. It's there. All right. Saving this for you. Brian Schottenheimer, Dallas Cowboys' new head coach. How do you feel about it after the press conference yesterday?
How do I feel in Brian? Are we solely talking
How do you
about
feel
Brian
about Brian?
Schottenheimer?
How do you feel about Brian Schottenheimer? I don't care about the Jerry Jones circus and like the Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones part of the press conference was a circus. It was idiotic. That was a clown show. How do you feel specifically about Brian Schottenheimer as the head coach? Are you feeling good about it? You feeling bad about it? You feeling uneasy? Obviously, this was not a popular hire. So how do you feel about it?
I personally don't feel bad about it. I think after understanding where he comes from and his dad, Marty Schottenheimer, I feel like there's a sense of we're going to work hard. Like listening to him talk, he talked about, hard work, getting his opportunity and taking advantage of the opportunity. And I think what he's going to do in Dallas is going to be pretty similar. I think he's going to be more of, defining culture, hard work. I think he's going to be more tough, hard-nosed than previous coaches.
And I think that those are all things that you and I were looking for in whoever the next head coach ended up being.
And the more I listen to him talk about, his time with Pete Carroll and the success that they had running the ball and the success they had coming off of play action, I think that bodes well because I think you need to take pressure off Dak. I think their run game is going to get better. And I think it makes sense, too, when your money is tied up with CD and Dak, let's bring in the guy who knows these guys already, who spent time with these guys already, who isn't going to make them completely change their entire offense or relearn an offense. Like,
yeah,
I respect those things. And then, his decision to bring in Eberflus as the defensive coordinator, I love that as well because Eberflus has head coaching experience. And even though that went wrong, the Bears defenses were good when Eberflus was there, you know, and he has a good track record of being.
And the Colts defenses were good when he was there with the Colts after he left Dallas as a position.
And so when you can bring in a guy who has head coaching experience to be paired with a first-time head coach, I like that. I like having as many head coaches in the room who aren't officially the head coach. You know what I mean? Because I just think it's going to bode well for them. I think they're going to be tougher on defense. I just think they're going to be tougher overall.
I do
So
too.
even though it's not sexy, I think of, listening to him talk about getting his opportunity and the hard work and him not knowing whether he was going to get the opportunity. It goes back to kind of what Marcus Freeman says is trust beyond knowing. Like, he trusted that he would eventually get his opportunity. And even when he didn't think it was going to be there, he got his opportunity, no matter how back end it was or, how he got there. The fact is he stayed the course and got his opportunity. And I think that's what he needs to kind of instill into this team is it's not always going to go our way, but we need to continue to fight and work hard. And I just think you're going to see a more disciplined team overall.
I think so as well. And, look, I became resigned a long time ago to the fact that Jerry Jones is only going to hire a certain kind of head coach. It's going to be either coaches who don't have a lot of other options. But the criteria has basically been you're either a former head coach who's done something, Bill Parcells and Mike McCarthy fit that bill, or you're a coordinator who has a previous connection, first-time head coach, previous connection to Jerry Jones. And that's obviously what Schottenheimer is. And the more you listen to what he has to say and what he brings to the table, I think it's actually a pretty good fit. Look, Brandon, you're a 49ers fan. Like, I get it. Like, you can sit here and mock it. Everyone's mocking it, but he's turned down head coaching opportunities before with Buffalo and Miami. And I think that that's part of what's taken him so long to get to where he is right now. Look, this guy was the offensive coordinator with the Jets when Mark Sanchez was the quarterback and they went to the AFC Championship game. Think about that for a minute. Mark Sanchez was the quarterback for the New York Jets in 2 AFC Championship games. And Brian Schottenheimer was, the coordinator of that team. There are a lot of similarities to Marcus Freeman when you look at Brian Schottenheimer, though. He's a culture guy. He's a relationship guy. That's why Dak Prescott and a bunch of other players were in the room, and it's one of the first things that he talked about was the building relationships and all that kind of stuff. But you and I know, when did the offense take off last year? When was the offense good? It was after they got pummeled. They got pummeled by the 49ers. They changed the offense. They started running the ball more, but they also ran the offense more through CeeDee Lamb. And it started with Schottenheimer and Dak Prescott convincing Mike McCarthy that they needed to make some changes. But they didn't stick with that this year. It went back to the offense that Mike McCarthy wanted to run, and the culture was bad under McCarthy. I think that was obvious, and they needed to fix it. But like specific to actual X and O football, Schottenheimer wants more play action. I think that's good. He wants more tempo. I think, that's good in spurts, but he also wants more condensed splits by the wide receiver. He talked about wanting, like the run plays and the pass plays
to look the same,
basically. And he's talked about,
Very
like
McVay and Shanahan.
That's exactly right. More McVay, Shanahan, and that by nature is naturally going to make you a more physical football team because your wide receivers now are going to be part of the blocking as well. Yeah, so they're like, and it's not going to look drastically. Mike McCarthy apparently had his Cowboys teams this season were number 3 in terms of wide splits. Like they were split out wider than all but 2 teams in the NFL. And again, I think that that's going to make them, a naturally a more physical football team. It's going, so like you're not going to look quite as predictable. But, like Ross Tucker, I was listening to some Dallas. I've been listening to a lot of Dallas radio. He was on as a guest. Ross Tucker said, he played for 9 different NFL teams. He played for Joe Gibbs. He played for Marty Schottenheimer. He played for Bill Belichick. And Ross Tucker said that Marty Schottenheimer was the best coach that he ever played for. And a big part of that was the culture, like the being in the locker room, the community, like all those different things. And so like he was a leader of men. His teams were physical and they were tough. Marty Schottenheimer's were. And now, just because you're Brian Schottenheimer and you're the son of Marty Schottenheimer doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean obviously he's going to do everything like that. But when it comes to those like culture things, Like, I think that that's a big part of who Brian Schottenheimer is. So, look, he's at the end of the day, he's got to go out and win football games. But at least for right now, I like a lot of the concepts, and they needed a culture overhaul. They're going to get a culture overhaul. So we'll see how far it goes next year. I don't think they're going to be soft. Yeah. He actually could win playoff games, Michael. He just couldn't. He just couldn't get to the Super Bowl. Marty couldn't get to the Super Bowl. He won playoff games. It's not Marty Schottenheimer's fault that Kevin Mack fumbled in the AFC Championship game at the 3-yard line. Like, they were that close to going to the Super Bowl and beating the Denver Broncos. The bounces, didn't go their way. I'm fully aware of Marty Schottenheimer's shortcomings in the playoffs. But the Dallas Cowboys have had those shortcomings as well. I would at least in the short term settle for a better culture in the locker room and a more physical team on Sundays. And I think that at the very least, they're going to get that. So we'll see where it goes. I mean, they've got the core. Here's what's going to tell me. Like, Zach Martin has not fully committed to retiring. He has kind of flirted with, he had talked about maybe this is it for him. Now, I don't think that, like, the success or failure is ultimately going to fall on whether Zach Martin decides to retire or keep playing. But if Zach Martin decides to keep playing after this, I think that is a potential really good sign for the direction that Notre Dame or that Dallas could be heading with this change. Because again, I feel like from a personality standpoint, the personalities are different, but when you talk about culture, communication with players, all those different things, I think that there's a lot of similarities between Brian Schottenheimer and Marcus Freeman. So we'll see where it goes. I'm at least more encouraged, like hearing exactly what he stands for and what he wants to do than I probably was a week ago when this stuff, when the reports of Schottenheimer started coming out. I think you kind of fall in the same category, right?
Yes.
All right. That's going to do it for today. Man, we were here for a while. Appreciate you being here. I'm going to be gone the next couple of days. I don't know what Vince has planned for tomorrow. I think Jesse and Vince are going to be here Thursday, and I'll be back Friday. We're going to Virginia Tech with Notre Dame women's basketball for a game Thursday night. So that'll be what I've got going on Thursday. Hit the like button before you leave. Appreciate you as always. Jess, great being back with you as always. We'll talk to you later. IB Nation Sports Talk.